Morning, everybody. We'll give it 2 minutes and then we'll kick off. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining this morning. We're going to kick off, and I have asked Steve Lunsford if he would open us up with a bit of a how's stuff going for you, Steve. I think it'll be a good segue into kind of talking about market conditions and like, hey, what's going on with COVID? It is still around. How's it affecting the industry? One of the reasons that I asked Steve to share is that being on the front end of his career, right? Like Steve hasn't been in real estate, although Steve's been around real estate for a long time. He hasn't been in real estate himself for very long. And so COVID for him came on the front end of trying to build a business, which is true for many of you. But I also asked Steve to share because he has just gone through a very noticeable uptick in business, and which is to be celebrated. Way to go, Steve. Congratulations. I'm going to ask you to share about that. But there is this kind of interesting moment in most realtors' career where it feels like it happens really fast, and all of a sudden you see this okay, business is now predictable. Like I have a steadier stream of clients. My pendings just went up by a ton. And if you try to chart it out, it looks like it happens so fast. Yet I think for most realtors who are in that circumstance, they don't feel like it happened quickly because they experienced everything leading up to it. So kind of the difference of the viewing from the outside versus when you're on the inside of that. So, Steve, I don't mean to prescribe your take, but congrats on the shift in your business here in the middle of COVID. So yeah, share with us what things have been like for you over the last 3 or 4 months and kind of that jump in the business and what your take is right now on your business. Thanks for being willing to do this, by the way.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so I mean, I'll start out by saying, I mean, a lot of people have different approaches. You kind of, that's a great thing about real estate is you can kind of build the one that works for you. Mine's highly sphere oriented. So I mean, it's a lot of spending social time with people that I like to spend time with, getting to know new people, things like that. So I don't do a ton of cold calls to expired listings and for sale by owners and stuff like that. So that's how I built my business. I started back in October of 2018, so I'm coming up on 2 years. So there was a number of things that I would say probably got my year off to a slow start. Probably the least of which was COVID. So I had a brokerage swap in February. That can be a little bit disruptive. I think we're over that. birth of my child about 5 minutes before COVID. My wife had back surgery. I had elbow surgery. And then I guess last of all, he had COVID, which, for me has been kind of a non-factor. People ask me how it's affected my real estate business, and I tell them I don't know what they're talking about. What's happened, that early disruption, definitely stalled me out. I don't think I closed anything until April. But what I've seen happen since then is I think a lot of the things that may have happened back in April, May, and maybe got delayed, have now all kind of come rushing in all at once, which is made for what's going to be a pretty wild July. I think, So, I think trusting the process has worked out for me. And, we all have disruptions in our lives from time to time. And, I think you just have to try to trust the process and continue to move forward. What does concern me, I think, with my approach a little bit would be, it being largely relational. I haven't been able to do as much of that as I would normally. And, I haven't got to go, grab a beer after work or do lunch with people I haven't seen in a while and all that stuff. And I think what makes me anxious is to think, further out, what am I missing? Who have I not talked to? And I think that, I got to go back to trusting that if I do the work, everything will work itself out. I just have to make good decisions in how I'm doing that work. An old mentor of mine always used this fishing analogy that I always liked. I could go out on the fish and catch a giant fish in 5 minutes, or I could go out there for 8 hours and not catch anything. But the reality is, if I don't spend any time in the lake, I'm not going to catch any fish, big or small. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. If anybody has any questions about any of that, please go ahead. That's about all I got on
it. Steve, if you could go back 120 days, anything you would tell yourself, maybe like do something differently or speak to the mentality you had then, or do you think it played out just kind of as it should have and you wouldn't do anything differently or tell yourself something?
I don't know. I don't feel like there was a bunch of stuff that I missed or stuff that fell through the cracks. Sometimes you don't find out about that stuff till way later, but no, I think I just tell myself that it's all going to work out. I just have to stay the course and work with the circumstances that the world has given us.
Anybody else, feel free to unmute yourself or jump into the chat here to ask Steve a question. While you're doing that, I will point out that as of right now, Steve has almost 4 times the amount of business pending as he closed in the first 6 months of the year, which it's surprisingly common. Like there is a point in most experienced realtors' careers where something like that happens. This concentrated, I have 4 times pending right now what I closed in the last 6 months shift. Now that's a pretty darn concentrated, to Steve's point. July is going to be crazy for him in a good way. But I think it can be good encouragement for people who are like earlier in the process to say, gosh, I feel like I'm putting in this work now and not seeing a whole lot of effect from the labor. And Steve now could probably, and I'm not saying he should do this, but he could go through the 7 deals that he has pending and try to trace back on like a time map what went into those 7 pending transactions. What knowledge base did I need to acquire? What business development strategies, what relationships existed? How far back could I trace the effort that went into those 7 deals? And my guess is he's going at least a year back on a couple of them, and maybe longer. And so I just, Steve, thanks for being our test case this morning of a really good example for that moment where all of a sudden work for a long period of time pays off in this concentrated moment. And not everybody's going to experience it quite like this. But it's just a really good example of kind of that. You said trust the process. I think that's great. Like, trust the inputs over a long period of time, even if they don't pay off in the moment. That's a really great encouragement. Rosie has a question.
Steve, I would love to know from you, like, what do you tell yourself when business is slow, like in those months that it feels kind of dry? Because I can't remember exactly how long you've been in the business, but it's not like a crazy amount of time. I'm curious, like, do you feel like you have that confidence built up that you're like, oh yeah, I know business is coming? Or is it kind of a lot of work to get yourself into that like good headspace of like, no, it's going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I would tell this to anybody that was inside their first year. I'm nearly to 2 years. Is, I mean, the fear that you have because you're going to have a slow start in real estate. That's just kind of how it goes. The fear is that is my strategy right to bring me business for the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And I mean, I just think you have to have faith in your own strategy, which for me is, like I said, just getting in front of people, don't let your circle forget you exist. And that's the main part of my strategy. A lot of it's just building those relationships strong.
That's great. Thanks.
If anybody else has a question for Steve, feel free to drop that in the chat and we can circle back to it. So kind of on a parallel note to looking at Steve's business, this is a really encouraging thing, and it's exciting to be able to say Steve was not the only example that we could provide right now of something pretty similar to what he has going on. Nobody had quite the jump right now in terms of percentage of business that Steve has in terms of like closed in the last year versus pending right now. But quite a few of you have as many pending transactions right now as you have ever had. This is kind of anecdotal, but I think that's kind of a theme in the brokerage right now. The number of pending transactions that we have as a company is the highest we've ever had. So that's worth note that like you could say my brokerage has more pendings right now than they have ever had. Fact. In addition to the brokerage, many of our agents and teams have as many pending transactions right now as they have ever had. And it's going back to this question of what's happening in real estate, right? Like we always kind of ask that, but with COVID, it's been perhaps a higher priority question, maybe more anxiety or curiosity about impact to real estate. And the number of questions I'm getting from my own circle about real estate haven't died down. I'd be kind of curious to know, just as a brokerage wide, are you all getting asked that question as often as you were 30 days ago or 60 days ago? My guess is that you are. I am actually kind of curious about that. Feel free to chime in on the chat of saying like, nah, that's died down. I'm not getting asked that as much, or I am getting asked that as much. But I think it's worth just kind of continual conversation as a company so that you still have good comprehensive answers to that. So some of you may be IBJ readers. We've talked about the IBJ. They run the monthly, at least once a month. They'll put out an article that's based upon MyBoar's monthly report. And now for 2 months in a row, the headline has been almost identical. Real estate sales plummet, smaller text for the second line, while Central Indiana sets record price. The last 2 months has been some version of that, because May was like a mirror image of April, which is transaction volume was off significantly. I think May was off 23%. So down 23% in terms of transaction count. But in May, we again set the record for median sale price in Central Indiana. And I'm going to be really surprised if we don't set it again in June. Well, we don't know yet, but June's now done as of yesterday. And I think the same thing is going to be true. We'll see transaction volume in 2020 down in comparison to June of 2019, but probably again having set a record price. So we looked at the 2 weeks ago, we looked at that Freddie Mac article that was super analytical about inventory shortage. That's what we're still seeing. I was chatting with one of my teammates yesterday. It was kind of interesting. She was saying that she had this experience of in the mid 300,000s. She was articulating that she thinks all this inventory pressure that we all kind of agree on being in the mid to high twos has now transitioned like even up into the mid threes. Just multiple buyers looking in that 350 to 375 window, and like they're all just getting beat out. So kind of repeatedly losing out in multiple offer situations. And we know multiple offers can happen at any price point. But I think that's true, that inventory shortage is actually creeping up well above our median, thus the price increase. And so I think we now have a 90-day like set of information. It's very clear. Transaction volume is down because inventory is low, but prices are the highest they've ever been. Like clear, not even close. That's just now factual. What I think is pretty interesting, Steve referenced this. Steve, I think you said maybe several of your July pendings are stuff that maybe would have closed in May or June had it not been for COVID, and the market's kind of bearing that out. So just a couple data points as a brokerage that you might find interesting. So for the month of June, our June 2020 will be about 1.5 times our June 2019, but our brokerage is also about 1.5 times the size of what it was in June 19. So what that means is that our transaction volume per realtor, June 19 to June 20, is about the same. Follow me on that? So if you kind of boiled it down to an average realtor at Platt, you did the same number of deals in 2019 that you did in 2020 for the month of June. The average price is going to go up a little bit, kind of with the market. Average price went up, our average deal went up. As it stands right now, we will likely do double our 19 transaction count for the month of July. And actually could do more. It is theoretically possible that we will close more than double what we did in 2019, meaning our per agent transaction volume in July is going to go way up. So July is typically a pretty high closing month. So the way I would describe July under normal circumstances is agents start to express that it feels slow in July, like it's dead, but you have a lot of closings from stuff that happened 30, 45, 60 days ago. So there's a lot of closings in July, but it feels slow. Well, what I think people are experiencing, and I'm curious if y'all would agree or disagree, what I think people are experiencing now is high closing volume, higher than normal closing volume, but it doesn't feel slow. Like that we're we have a level of activity in the marketplace right now that is higher than normal for July. We'll see if this pans out to be true, but I think where that's going to land is that August and September, which are normally lower transaction count months, August and September typically are, they feel slow and they are slow. July feels slow and it's actually not. August and September are both. But I think that indicators right now would say transaction count in August and September are probably going to be higher than normal, kind of catching our market up to like a year to date projected transaction count. So TLDR summary, it looks to me like prices have clearly gone up and that a significant number of transactions are going to get pushed from March, April, May to June, July, August, like a 90-day lag. That's what it looks like to me is going to be the impact of COVID. I think there are still really good questions out there in terms of what does unemployment look like? Like in the lending climate, are we going to see kind of a fallout in terms of just people's ability to access financing because of high unemployment? Because while I think you can see individual cases, isolated cases of that, it just doesn't look like it's affected our industry. And I'll admit that there's a part of me that still thinks that doesn't make sense. Like unemployment is still very, very high. And eventually that just seems like it has to affect our marketplace. But we've just never had this type of unemployment. So it's difficult to gauge what it's going to do. And so I'm not trying to predict that other than saying, I think that's still a good question. Stephanie, were you saying amen to July feeling really busy? And I think you were, because I know what our team's transaction pendings right now are. That was just kind of a market update in terms of what's going on, illustrating that Steve's experience is actually not uncommon. Maybe the degree to which he's had that happen right here in the middle of the year is like the degree to which it's happened is unique, but kind of that principle of things felt slow and now all of a sudden boom. I think that's kind of what the market's experiencing in general. And I think you're safe to tell consumers that right now it looks like the year over year transaction count may actually turn out to be a very normal year with just a 90-day lag. And when we normally experience peak closing volume, and that prices are up. Prices clearly are up. But I'm curious, I would love it if an agent here or a team member or a team lead here would say, gosh, that's just not been our experience. Or if you would say like, yep, totally fits in line with what we're experiencing, more of a kind of individual anecdotal level, or any questions on that? Emily, is that an all-encompassing I agree with everything that has been said to this point? Love it.
With everything, guys. I would say that my personal experience has been that business is strong. And when you look at the trends of my past sales, I actually close the most in third quarter historically. And I've had a really active second quarter and even leading into the first quarter. So I have felt like things are really busy, much busier for me than they have been in the past. And And I haven't gotten any questions about the market personally. Like, I think people are just kind of moving forward and navigating things how they can. And, I'm a little interested to see what happens if school starts up and what the schedule of school is going to be with people. And I think people are kind of like in summer mode right now. So if people go back to e-learning or all that kind of stuff, I wonder if that's going to impact things, but that's all.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think the early August back to school is and has historically been the most predictable impact to our market in an annual cycle, like more predictable than, say, like the holidays.
Right.
Back to school is the one, like, it's going to slow down in early August with back to school. And I think people assume holidays do that, and they kind of do, but not to the same level. What is back to school going to look like? That's a great question.
Make hay while you can, people. Make hay while you can.
Yeah, Johanna, that's a really good point. Johanna commented that her business hasn't turned into pendings yet, but definitely feels busier, and hoping to have Steve's situation by the fall. That's a good way of saying that. That's why when you're inside the circumstances, it always feels like a much longer process than it would look like on paper. Like you can feel it. You know that it's coming. Predicting the when is hard, but it sounds like Johanna's kind of in that moment. Yeah, and I was talking with my team about this the other day. Just, I don't know, perspective going back 90 days. I think it's worth pointing out, like, as a brokerage, we very well might close 200 sides in July. It won't be quite 200 transactions, but we might be on a side of the deal 200 times in the month of July. And like, if you had said that 90 days ago, like the brokerage is going to have 200 sides in July, I would have taken the bet against you. I would have, and nothing to do with lack of confidence in Platt Collective, just the market. Like 90 days ago, if somebody had said, what could happen over the next 90 days to lead to 200 sides pending for the month of July, I'd have said, oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. How's that going to happen? So I just think it's something to be really grateful for. And Steve, thanks to your contribution as well. A decent chunk of those sides now are Steve. So along with quite a few of you who have a lot of pendings. I think I heard the other day Megan say she has her record number of pendings. I know that at least 2 and maybe 3 or 4 of our teams have their record number of pendings right now. So it's really great. Anything else? Anybody want to unmute themselves or jump into the chat to ask a question or just kind of speak to their temperature gauge on the marketplace or the industry right now? Everybody want to give a thumbs up that the policy on clear cooperation is now 100% understood and nobody's ever going to have any questions about that going forward?
I think constantly, like, these kids that are like left alone with other kids, I'm constantly like,
yeah, Billy just commented buy side is rough. Totally. It's the roughest I've ever seen it. This is the total mirror image of what 2009 was like. I thought we had the total mirror image a couple years ago. It is brutal right now as a buyer. Particularly at a median price point, really, really hard.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, I have a question for you. So, I have people ask me about that, and I go, "Yeah, we haven't really seen anything like this before, like what we've got going on right now. How low we are in inventory." And they go, "Well, when's that going to change?" And I go, "I don't know. Like, what would cause that to change? Economic catastrophe?"
Yeah, I mean, I think a change in the lending climate, um, but it's only two things, right? Either demand has to go down or supply has to go up. I mean, that's kind of like an obnoxious thing to say to answer your question. I'm not trying to be obnoxious, but what could cause the number of houses for sale to go up or the number of people buying to go down? Well, if a change in the lending climate happened, if interest rates went up, or if the kind of massive unemployment started to lead to fewer and fewer people being able to access a mortgage, you would see an ease in the demand. So that could do it. Or just a higher number of homes for sale. So if new construction picked back up, um, I struggle, honestly, I struggle to envision what's going to provide significant balance to that supply and demand tension. And I don't see it coming in the near future. We normally see it ease over the winter. I mean, the winter tends to be a little bit more favorable to buyers than the spring and summer. Prices go down every winter. Sale price as a percentage of list price goes down in the winter. Buyers have a bit more leverage. Who knows if that happens this winter? So, Steve, I don't have a good answer to your question, is what I should have said. Well, that's all we got. We'll end a few minutes early. Thanks everybody for jumping on. I would just encourage you, I think under any circumstances, having a finger on your pulse of the market is valuable. It's worth doing. You're always going to be able to lean on that in conversations with clients or potential clients. I just think it's more intensely true right now. Having that ready to go. I'll leave you with this one example. I was talking again with a teammate of mine yesterday. Buyer had submitted an offer on the house I think had listed for $340,000. And they submitted an offer where it was like they'd already gotten beat out on another house. And it was like, okay, we're going to get this one. Like, we're going to come in so aggressive, such a big escalation clause. We're not losing this one. And they lost it. So it's a tough situation. What do you say to that buyer? Like, well, that's really hard. And a part of my encouragement to the agent was, before you respond to them, do some research on what are houses like that selling right now as a percentage of list price, like to help your buyer understand that maybe list price right now, you just kind of need to ignore it. Like, in some circumstances, don't get hung up on what a house lists for, because if you do some research on the comparables, the data might say, well, list price is just a number. Like, here's where the value is, and you're gonna have competition. And so, like, help a buyer to get there with a little bit more than anecdote, being kind of ready with the, look, here's 10 examples of houses that sold at 115% or 120% of their list prices. So that doesn't change the fact that it's really hard to be the buyer. Just an example of preparing yourself with knowledge on the market conditions can help you in a really hard conversation with the client. So thanks, everybody. Great to see or hear from you today. Go enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. See you.